Is that the sound of coffee pouring, or respect being tested again? The briefing room hummed, the flag rope clicking outside like a metronome of rank. They mocked the old janitor, called him Grandpa Voices, sharp against the hiss of the pot, until silence slammed the air. Then the Admiral entered, light cutting across the table, eyes finding the faded bird ink on a trembling wrist, the proof of battles fought without a weapon, only duty. Still, the room waited, heartbeat by heartbeat, as he whispered the call sign that turned mockery into honor. The briefing room still smelled of burnt coffee and paperwork. Alan wiped the counter with slow, practiced circles, the kind that never called attention to themselves. The steam rose, curling through the greenish fluorescent light, until it vanished above the ceiling fan. "Hey, Grandpa," someone said from the table. Laughter followed, quick-clipped, nervous. He didn't look up. The rag kept its rhythm, one corner darkened by a spill no one else had noticed. Around him, young officers shuffled papers, half smiling at the joke. Careful Reynolds added, voice slick. "Wouldn't want the Admiral's coffee getting cold." Alan nodded once. "No, sir," he said, quiet as a radio left on low. He poured a steady line of coffee into the Admiral's cup, never spilling a drop. The room buzzed again with talk, training numbers, schedules, half-serious plans for the weekend. Alan moved between them like part of the furniture. Each refill came with a faint hiss of the pot, like punctuation to the noise. Still, something inside him noticed the echo of the word Grandpa. He'd worn it before on flight decks, in canteens, in the years after service when people thought old meant done. He set the pot down. Steam feathered the air between him and Reynolds. "You need sugar with that?" Alan asked. Reynolds blinked, unsure if it was kindness or reminder. No, thanks." The younger man turned back to his folder. Silence followed, not the heavy kind, but the one that comes when people realize they've said too much. Alan leaned on the counter for a moment, hand near the coffee pot handle. The reflection of the overhead light trembled in the surface of the cup, white ceramic, steady heat. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. There was only the work, the small duties that built the shape of a day. Someone dropped a pen. Someone else whispered an apology. The Admiral's chair scraped softly. Reynolds, the Admiral said, not unkindly, "You might want to mind your tone in front of those who've earned their stripes." A pause like air holding its breath. "Yes, sir." Reynolds's voice thinned. Alan pretended not to hear, pouring one last cup before stepping back. The fluorescent hum filled the space. The coffee smell deepened, bitter and grounding. But he let the silence stay. He'd learned long ago that quiet carried further than shouting ever could. Across the counter, the Admiral met his eye 1 second, no words. Just a nod, brief but solid. Alan answered with his own kind of salute, a half smile, and the simple act of wiping the counter clean again. Steam rose once more, turning the air into something softer. The laughter didn't return. Only the soft scrape of cups, the shuffle of papers, and the sound of service done right. Briggs was the new logistics officer, sharp haircut, faster talk, the kind of man who thought silence meant agreement. He had noticed the janitor once or twice, but never really seen him until that morning. Alan stood by the supply table, rolling down his sleeves. The edge of one cuff hesitated, showing a faint blue mark beneath the wrist. At first, Briggs thought it was an old burn. Then the light from the window cut through the blinds and landed right on it. A small bird wings, outstretched ink, faded but exact. The Admiral's insignia on the wall caught the same light. For a second, the shapes almost matched. Briggs blinked. "Sir, Alan." "Yes. Where'd you get that tattoo?" Alan looked down, tugged the sleeve once, calm as before. "Long time ago, service?" "Something like that." Briggs hesitated. "Air or ground?" Alan gave a tiny smile. Sky had a hand in it. The younger man grinned awkwardly, not sure if it was a joke. My uncle flew recon back in '88. Said the old birds never stopped watching the sky. Alan didn't answer. His eyes went to the reflection in the coffee urn Briggs behind him, the morning light, the dull shine of the counter, like a memory half awake. Then the door opened hard. Reynolds came in holding a clipboard. "We're short on clean mugs again," he said. "Mop and bucket, please." Briggs froze. The phrase hung there heavy and wrong. Alan didn't flinch. He reached for the mop, the bucket like muscle memory. Steam rose from the floor cleaner wrapping around his hands. Briggs swallowed. "Sir, he's got that bird tattoo." Reynolds didn't even look. "He's got stains to worry about, not stories." Alan was quiet. The handle of the mop knocked gently against the bucket's rim, a hollow note. He was slammed by protocol, pinned not by force but by the small rules that decide who gets to speak. SM lock plus social pressure, not violence. The Admiral's voice came from down the hall. "Reynolds, you'll want to see me. Now." Reynolds stiffened. "Yes, sir." He left the clipboard behind. Alan mopped the same patch twice, then leaned the handle against the wall. "Spill's gone," he said softly. Briggs stood still. The tattoo, the calm tone, the way he held the mop, it didn't fit the picture of a man who'd been mocked. It felt rehearsed, like discipline, not defeat. "You sure you were never in?" Briggs asked. Alan smiled without turning. "You learn things one way or another." The bird inked on his skin, stirred like it remembered. Briggs exhaled. The sound was the only thing moving in the room now. From somewhere beyond the window, a helicopter passed, slow, distant. Its shadow flickered across the floor and disappeared. Alan set the bucket aside. The fluorescent light hummed again. Then just before the next group came in, Briggs straightened the clipboard on the counter, small, respectful, and said mostly to himself, "Sir, yes, sir." The hallway outside the briefing room was cooler, quieter, built for secrets and signals. Briggs stepped out, closing the door with a careful click. The fluorescent buzz dulled behind him. For a heartbeat, only his own pulse filled the silence. He stared at the closed door. The image of that tattoo, the faint bird under the old man's skin, wouldn't leave his mind. It wasn't decoration. It was history. He'd seen that same bird once in a classified archive slide deck labeled "Ghost Units Declassified." He swallowed. Couldn't be the same man. Still, the thought perched somewhere in his chest, refusing to move. The small communications booth at the corridor's end glowed with a single red light. Briggs pushed the door open, then paused. For a moment, the hum of the servers felt like a low heartbeat under the floor. He picked up the handset. "Secure line," the operator's voice said. "Patch me through to Commander Shaw, office of Admiral Morrison." There was a pause, a static crackle. "Stand by." The light on the console turned from amber to red. The color washed over Briggs's face, warm and tense like a warning flare that didn't make a sound. "Commander Shaw speaking. Sir Chief Warrant Officer Briggs, Pacific Intelligence." "Go ahead, Chief." Briggs exhaled slowly. "We may have a personnel situation," meaning he tightened his grip on the receiver. "A civilian contractor named Alan McCarthy. He's working the coffee service. There's a mark on his wrist." "Describe it." "A bird stylized swept wings. Looks like the emblem from Ghost Owl." Static. Then silence. "Repeat that," Shaw said. Briggs obeyed. He could almost hear the command center freezing on the other end. After a long second, Shaw's tone changed. "Chief, stay where you are. I'll inform the Admiral." "Yes, sir." The line went dead. The red light blinked once, then steadied again, flooding the booth in its uneasy glow. Briggs set the receiver back, hand trembling slightly. The booth seemed smaller now, air thick with recycled cold. He looked down at his notes, words he couldn't read anymore. He had just transferred a kind of trust that didn't come easy, the trust that the truth, even uncomfortable, mattered more than protocol. Still. A faint creak echoed from the corridor. Then the door handle turned harder than before. For a heartbeat, Briggs thought Reynolds had followed him, ready to scold him for stepping out. But when the door opened, no one spoke. Just the wash of overhead lights spilling into the booth, carrying the smell of coffee and tension. He straightened. The silence was perfect, suspended between fear and confirmation. He didn't know yet that the call had already reached the top, that somewhere a 4-star admiral was standing up from his desk, remembering a call sign that had once meant salvation. Briggs rubbed his temples. The red light flickered against his wristwatch, ticking steady. Outside, the corridor returned to its quiet hum. Alan's silhouette moved past the frosted glass, carrying a coffee pot in one hand. He didn't look toward the booth, didn't slow down. Briggs watched him go, then whispered to the empty air. "Guess the sky still has its own messengers." He stepped out, closing the booth door behind him. The red light stayed on for a moment, then dimmed like a secret, agreeing to wait. The briefing room door burst open. Light from the corridor flooded in sharp and white, cutting across the table and scattering reflections off the data screens. Every officer froze. The air that moments ago buzzed with chatter went thin, heavy. Fleet Admiral Morrison stepped through the doorway. He didn't hurry, he didn't have to. Authority arrived with him like the change of weather. "Carry on," he said, voice steady but colder than the room's air conditioning. Reynolds stood half saluting, half stammering. "Sir, we were just—" Morrison ignored him. His gaze swept across the rows of faces, then stopped on Alan. The old man stood still beside the coffee station, one hand resting lightly on the counter, steam drifting around him like fog around a monument. The Admiral's boots made no sound on the carpet. He walked down the aisle until he was face to face with the man everyone had dismissed. A silent beat stretched long. You could hear the hum of servers, the tick of someone's watch, the faint crack of a cup cooling on the table. Then Morrison spoke. "Good to see you, Ghost Owl." The words dropped like a flare into still water. No one moved. Reynolds blinked eyes wide, trying to compute what he'd just heard. "Ghost." "What?" The Admiral didn't answer him. His attention stayed fixed on Alan. "You kept it quiet," he said softly. "All these years." Alan inclined his head. "Didn't seem to need saying." The Admiral's jaw tightened. Fire in his eyes, but not anger. Respect. Pure and unwavering. He lifted his hand in a crisp salute. "For those who never stopped carrying the weight." Alan's own arm rose slower but precise. "1,000 battles, Admiral," he said, the word battle, not of violence but of responsibility. Their salutes met in perfect symmetry. Around them, the room felt suspended between decades, 2 generations of service bridging time through one simple gesture. Morrison turned, finally facing Reynolds. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, "you owe this man more than your rank can repay." Reynolds swallowed, hard color draining from his face. "Sir, I didn't know." "That's exactly the point," Morrison cut in. "You didn't care to know." A murmur rippled through the officers. The hierarchy of the room inverted in an instant. The coffee man at its center, the decorated officer humbled in his shadow. Alan shifted, breaking the silence. He's young, he said quietly. The kind that still thinks rank means wisdom. Time will sort that out. Morrison gave a slow nod. You never did like seeing men punished when they could be taught. He turned to the rest of the room. For your records, he said, Ghost Owl flew 36 missions over hostile airspace. When his wingman went down, he stayed behind 3 days, no weapon, just grit and compass. He saved 6 men and vanished into the jungle. The Admiral's voice steadied. That bird on his wrist. It's more than a mark. It's a reminder of what service really looks like. Was silence again. Then a breath, collective and low, like the room itself was exhaling. The Admiral lowered his hand. At ease, gentlemen. Allen poured the Admiral a fresh cup of coffee. Still black, sir, still black, Morrison said. And this time he smiled. The next morning, the canteen felt different. No one said it, but everyone moved quieter, like a place still echoing from a hymn. The coffee line stretched longer than usual, though the urns were full. Allen stood where he always did, wiping down the counter with that same slow rhythm. The old percolator gurgled in the background, its steady hiss marking time more faithfully than the wall clock. When Briggs entered, a few younger officers nodded at him. He nodded back, then pinned a sheet of paper on the wooden notice board near the door. New training module, heritage and respect, mandatory attendance. Instructor C.W.O. Briggs. Someone whistled softly. That's new. Briggs smiled. Guess we're all pouring our own coffee now. Laughter gentle, the good kind, rolled through the room. The tension that once clung to the air had melted into something lighter. Reynolds came in quietly, civilian jacket over his shoulders. He paused near the entrance, scanning the room that used to orbit around him. No one looked away, but no one mocked him either. He made his way to the counter. Mr. McCarthy, he said, voice measured. May I? Allen nodded before he could finish. Cup's right there, son. Reynolds hesitated, then poured his own coffee. The pot was heavier than he expected. You make it look easy. Allen's mouth curved slightly. Practice, he said, and knowing when to stop pouring. That got another chuckle from someone at the back table. Reynolds managed a faint smile. He took out a small coin, one of those challenge coins officers passed around for service recognition, and set it on the counter. For the tip jar, he said. Allen looked at it. The coin caught the morning sun from the high window, glinting off the words, Honor earned, not issued. Appreciate that, Allen said softly. He didn't pocket it. He placed it beside the coffee pot, under the warm beam of light. Across the room, Briggs leaned on the notice board, arms crossed. First class for the Respect program starts Monday, he announced. Coffee's on me. Thought the Navy ran on diesel, not caffeine, someone quipped. Not anymore, Briggs said. Runs on gratitude now. The canteen filled with low, easy conversation. For the first time in months, it sounded like a team instead of a rank chart. Allen poured another round, moving slower than usual, letting the moment stretch. He looked around at Briggs, at Reynolds, at the faces now turned toward him without pretense. The light from the window shifted, catching the coffee cup on the counter. The ceramic gleamed haloed in gold. He reached out and steadied it just as the percolator clicked off with a soft sigh. For a long breath, the whole room was still just the smell of coffee, the scrape of a chair, and sunlight warming the old wooden board. The base was quieter in the late afternoon. Wind pushed across the parking lot, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel and ocean salt. The day's last sunlight settled in long amber stripes across the canteen floor. Allen was cleaning up, same as always. The percolator exhaled one last sigh. The steam rose thin and slow before fading into the ceiling vents. It looked almost like a ghost leaving the room, peaceful, unhurried. He stacked the mugs carefully, each one turned handle out, every edge aligned. Ritual, not routine. The door opened behind him. Footsteps paused, unsure. "Mr. McCarthy." He turned. Reynolds stood there, no clipboard, no uniform, just a man trying to find the right words. "I didn't come to bother you," Reynolds said. "I just needed to say something before I ship out." Alan waited. The quiet invited honesty. "I was wrong," Reynolds said finally. "About you, about what respect means. I thought it was something people gave you when you earned a title." He shook his head. "Turns out it's what you give before you know someone's story." Alan studied him, then looked down at the coffee pot between them. "Still take it with cream?" Reynolds almost smiled. "Yes, sir." Alan poured. The cup filled with a low hiss, and for a moment both men watched the steam climb into the golden light. Reynolds took a breath. "When the Admiral told us who you were, I didn't know where to look. I kept thinking about how many times I must have walked right past you." Alan shrugged. "Happens. Folks see what's easy to see." Reynolds nodded slowly. "I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry." Alan met his eyes. "I accept that, son. You made a mistake. You learned from it. That's what matters." He gestured toward the window. Outside, the flag on the pole moved gently in the breeze, steady, not dramatic. "Everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about," he said. "Sometimes the hardest fight's just learning to listen." Reynolds stared at the floor, then at the old man who had every right to stay angry and chose not to. "Thank you," he whispered. Alan smiled. "You're welcome. Now go do better. That's the real thank you." Reynolds picked up his cup, nodded once more, and left. The door swung shut with a soft click. For a few seconds, the only sound was the faint gurgle from the sink and the distant hum of evening traffic beyond the gates. Alan looked around the empty canteen, the warm light on the counter, the quiet hum of the refrigeration unit, the empty chairs all facing the same direction. The room fell silent again, but this time it was respect. He set the coffee pot down. The last ribbon of steam drifted upward, curling into the air, before disappearing entirely. Then he turned off the lights and stepped outside into the soft dusk, the smell of coffee still clinging to his sleeves. The canteen was empty except for the slow hiss of the percolator cooling down and the flag outside moving in the wind. Still, Alan stayed for a moment, watching the sunlight catch the coin beside the coffee pot, a small, steady proof that respect had returned to the room. Then he smiled, knowing that kindness was never a transaction, but a habit, like keeping a light in the window long after the storm has passed. The next day, someone pinned a note to the board, "For Mr. McCarthy, thank you for teaching us how to serve quietly."